Hi guys, Andrew here with headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to talk all about the brand new Focal Celestee. Celestee? Celeste? E? Focal coming out with a brand new headphone and everybody being confused about the naming convention, name a more iconic duo. Anyways, this is a over-ear closed-back dynamic driver headphone that comes in right at around $990. Let's check it out. All right, so this is a demo unit that was sent over by Focal for evaluation. Big thanks to Focal for sending that out. But of course, all thoughts and opinions are my own, and I've not been paid to say anything in particular about it. And of course, we've just concluded a live stream with Focal by the time you guys are watching this. Obviously, I'm recording this before that. But if you guys haven't seen the live stream that we've done yet, where we've spoken with Focal, definitely go give that a watch. And of course, a big congrats to the winner of the giveaway of this headphone. I don't know who that is at this point, but if you guys are wondering about the giveaways, we'll be doing them a little bit more regularly on this channel, so that's just something to look forward to in the coming months. Now, let's dive into the Focal Celestee. I'm going with that. The first thing that you'll notice is that it comes in this case, but this is a different colored case. It's sort of a navy blue and gold to kind of match the aesthetic of the headphone, but it's the same style of case that you get with the other Focal headphones. Somebody loves this. Somebody out there is super excited for me doing ASMR with headphone cases and zippers. Now, one of the big pain points of the Focal Elegia, which is the previous closed back that's now discontinued, was that the cable was this very stiff kind of material, and nobody really liked those cables. And this is the cable that comes with the Celestee, and it's very similar to the one that comes with Focal Radiance. And this is by far my favorite of Focal's cables. It's much better than the one that comes with the Focal Elegia, or the one that came with that one, and the shorter cable that came with the Clear as well. Those ones are weirdly rectangular, so they're very annoying to use portably. But this one is also not the greatest cable. I'm going to give my criticism where criticism is due. I still think that they can do better with the cables. It is an improvement, a dramatic improvement over the previous cables, but this is not as good as some of the cables that you might get from Odyssey, for example. Now, let's talk about the headphone. The Celestee is a navy blue, dark navy blue, and gold aesthetic, and I absolutely love it. This is exactly the headphone that I've wanted Focal to make as far as the aesthetic goes. When the Stellia came out, which is their higher-end model with the beryllium driver there, I liked the design of it, but I wasn't too fond of the colors. And I know there were a lot of people out there who really liked the look of the Stellia, but I was somebody who preferred the look of the Elegia, that somewhat more understated look. And this design, it really kind of fits in the middle there, I find. It retains that same sort of classy thing, that classy aesthetic that the Stellia has, while still being a little bit more muted and matte and understated with the color scheme, and I absolutely love it. It works so incredibly well. Leave it to Focal to design a classy looking headphone. Now for the build, this isn't the most rugged feeling design, but it is a extremely premium feeling design. Everything from just the way that the spring-loaded mechanism works here to the extension system, everything feels incredibly satisfying, and it feels very calculated and refined as far as the build is concerned. One advantage over the Elegia is that the pads here are leather, a leather material. It is more of a hybrid material on the inside, but the outside is leather, so it's likely not going to wear out on you as quickly. Now for comfort, I find that the Celestee is not really all that different from the Focal Elegia. Initially, there's just this little bit of extra clamp there to it, but then that sort of lessens over time, and I find that eventually I don't really have any problem with it. Still, I do wish that it was just a little bit less on the clamp. The one benefit of the clamp force here is that it does make it so that it isolates a little bit better, isolates the sound a little bit better. And the first thing that I noticed when I tried these actually at the office was that I couldn't really hear voices going on around me at all, so that was great. Okay, so how does the Focal Celestee sound? Well, in a word, this is the more clear presentation overall compared to the Elegia and the Radiance. This is the one that has a little bit more of a forward and analytic presentation, where the Radiance is a little more laid back and a little bit warmer. But at the same time, this is the one that I actually personally prefer. So let's get into that, and let's talk about the technical performance first. And for anybody wondering, this is using the aluminum magnesium driver, and this does have the more traditional porting mechanism out the back here for bass, rather than the sort of side ported mechanism that's going on with the Radiance. Now, let's talk detail retrieval, and I'm going to rank Focal's closeback headphones as far as detail retrieval goes. Number 1 is the Stellia, that's their high-end beryllium driver one. Number 2 is the Celestee. Yes, number 2. Number 3 is the Radiance, and number 4 is the Elegia. That's kind of how I'm going to rank these as far as details concerned. Now, part of this could actually be due to the frequency response change, and we'll get into that. But the overall sense here that I get is that this is not only a more forward presentation as far as the soundstage is concerned, so it's a little bit tighter. This is not the headphone that you buy if you want a more spread out and spacious kind of soundstage, but the consequence of this is that it's a little bit more detailed. Like, it sounds like the details are a little bit more noticeable and a little bit more discernible. You know, I still think that the Focal Clear is like a little better there, but that's, of course, it's an open back. And as far as macro dynamics is concerned, yeah, Focal always nails it in the macro dynamics department. As far as punch and slam and that sort of excursive quality, they're all fantastic in that regard. I mean, these sort of hybrid style transducers with the independent surround. So the technical performance here, for the most part, apart from soundstage, is all fantastic, with one exception, and it's that the timbre is still a little bit more reminiscent of what was going on with the Elegia. The effect overall is that the timbre is not as natural as maybe a biocellulose style driver, but it's not something that I really worry about at all, because I think the other technical aspects far outweigh that as the drawback. So not the most natural sounding timbre, but it'll totally do. Okay, now let's dive into the objective data. I'm going to throw up the measurements here, and we'll talk all about frequency response and tonal balance next. Okay, so this is how the Focal Celestee measures relative to the Harman target. This is the one from 2018, so it does have the elevated base shelf there. And I'm mainly just using this one because I want to show kind of how close it gets, because I think it's kind of interesting. But once again, for anybody who's unaware how to read this stuff, I've done a whole video on that, and I encourage everybody to check that out. Essentially, the red line here is how the headphone measure, that's the frequency response, and the dotted line or dashed line is the target. And it's great if it gets somewhat close to that. Of course, it doesn't have to, and I don't base my judgment on adherence to a target, but it is interesting to see how it measures relative to a known data point like the Harman target. Lastly, I have to also say that if you're looking at measurements of these closed-back Focal headphones, you have to take them with a huge grain of salt, because they vary substantially depending on the clamp pressure and how much the pads are compressed. So not just positional variance, how significant the clamp is will make a huge difference on these headphones specifically, and also because of the spring-loaded action that's going on with the cups and how they fit to your head. So when you're seeing measurements of this headphone or any closed-back Focal headphone, and you're like, what is going on here? There is a good chance that whatever the measurement was conducted on, it didn't have the same clamp pressure that this one did or other ones did. So it's likely to show a little bit more variation than there actually is in reality with this headphone. So just keep that in mind, that it's more about sort of the pad compression and clamp that's going on. And you see that difference both in the bass and you see it in the treble area as well. So starting with the bass then, let's go through it. The big thing to note here is that there is a mid-bass emphasis here. And then thankfully it does come down in the upper bass, and this is where that very interesting 200 to 300 hertz cut shows up. It's interesting because, again, this is something that I think really works well for closed-back headphones. The 200 to 300 hertz cut really helps ensure that for the rest of the frequency response, it retains clarity and the bass doesn't, bleed into the mids. It doesn't crowd out anything else in the mix. Now, my preference for open back headphones is to have a little bit more presence there in the lower mids so that you get a little bit more richness of body and tone. But for whatever reason, when I hear that in closed back headphones, it tends to just not do so well, or at least in many of the ones that I've evaluated, right? So there's a risk that in closed back headphones, it can bleed into the mids if there isn't some sort of contour like what you see with the Harman target there. So this is something where I think, it's worth scrutinizing and it's worth evaluating. But if you listen to this headphone, you can tell that it really does actually work. And so I just encourage you guys to, if you get a chance, listen to that and see if this is something that you notice. Because for me, what this does, the effect of this is that it makes the bass emphasis very distinct. So what we're dealing with here is an emphasis for clarity for everything in sort of the mids and in the treble, but an emphasis for mid bass and below, just to make it satisfying and distinct and impactful. And in my opinion, this is very carefully and tastefully done. It's just like a dB or a dB and a half below the target, but it really, really does work. Now, moving up into the mids, everything looks pretty good. This is a slightly more mid and upper mid forward presentation, which is really nice for, the clarity of acoustic instruments. So acoustic guitars, pianos, and things like that come through fantastically. And then there is enough balance here for the treble. It's a little relaxed in the lower treble, and that actually works for me quite well because, as I've mentioned before, I'm a bit sensitive to 5K. Now, in this case, I think if you were to EQ this headphone, you could maybe adjust some of that up there. I wouldn't bother trying to fill in some of this stuff like, you know, around 4K and around 7.5K. You know, if you look at the way that any of these Focal headphones measure in the treble, they all have this sort of more ragged looking response rather than that more smooth response that you might get from, you know, Sennheiser HD 650 or something like that. But in general, this is actually a really good frequency response. One interesting thing that stands out to me here is that it actually overall looks very similar to the Focal Clear for the rest of this response, including the slight emphasis here around 1K. Now, surprisingly, I actually do find the Celestee's treble presentation to be a little bit smoother than that of the Clear. I think the Clear has more of a 6K peak going on, whereas with the Celestee, that region is not quite as elevated. Now, taking a step back here and looking at the whole picture, it doesn't perfectly match the Harman target, but there are many similarities and it has many similar features. So it has the bass boost and the bass shelf. It has the contoured lower mid-range and upper bass, that 200 to 300 hertz dip. It has the same kind of, you know, elevation and ear gain. It's a little shifted, you know, towards the mids and upper mids. So if you like a lot of tone and richness of tone there, this is going to give it to you. But it is also balanced out so it doesn't sound compressed or muffled and congested or anything like that. So in my opinion, Focal has done an excellent job with the tuning here. It's an improvement on the Elegia. It filled in a lot of the stuff that I was a little bit, you know, not too thrilled about with the Elegia, like the upper mids. And it also added this, it took down the lower mids a little bit. Now, for anybody wanting to see the difference between the Focal Celestee and the Radiance, I'm going to throw that up on the screen now. So you can see here that the Radiance, the dotted teal line here, it's definitely more, it's definitely bassier at around 100 and 150 hertz. So that sort of mid-bass focus is there. In my opinion, this, while it is more impactful, sure, I prefer the way that it's handled on the Celestee because I find that it does a little bit better for clarity overall for the rest of the frequency response as a result. Now you'll notice they are fairly similar here, but the Radiance is still a little bit more relaxed in the, you know, lower treble. And that was something that I did EQ on the Radiance. I brought it up a bit. So that's kind of what we're looking at with the Celestee. And in my opinion, it's one of the better frequency responses that Focal has had just overall. Essentially, you have here a somewhat more forward presentation that's a little bit more on the analytics side. But for anybody wondering if Focal were ever going to come out with a closeback Focal Clear, this is the closest that I've heard to that yet. Now, let's get into some comparisons, and let's start this off by comparing it against the Focal Radiance, because I think a lot of people will be asking, well, should I get the Celestee or should I get the Radiance or should I get the Elegia? Well, the Elegia, I think it's discontinued now, so I don't know if you'll be able to find that. And it's actually interesting because the Celestee is very similar in its tuning to what I would EQ the Elegia to. But compared to the Radiance, the Focal Radiance is the more comfortable headphone. Its soundstage is a little bit further away. It's a little more spacious on the stage. It's not quite as analytic and forward sounding as the Celestee. It's a little more, laid back. And the tuning is a little bit warmer here. Personally, I prefer the sound of the Celestee because the type of music that I listen to, I think it really does well with this. It has, I like to listen to a lot of jazz and acoustic and classical and that kind of stuff. And the Celestee is perfect for that, for piano recordings, acoustic guitar recordings, vocal recordings, like vocal jazz. It's phenomenal for that. This is one of my favorite headphones for my genres, like the genres that I like the most. Now, compared to the Elegia, the Celestee is the straightforward upgrade that I've been wanting them to make, and they finally have. The Elegia is more lower mid forward. I know a lot of people like that tuning. I did EQ it, but I found the Elegia to be a little more lower mid forward there, and then a little relaxed in the upper mids, around 3-4K. And with the Celestee, it basically fills all that in. It's the opposite, actually. It's relaxed in the lower mids, and it fills in the upper mids appropriately. So they did everything that I wanted them to with the Celestee's tuning to improve on the Elegia. Compared to the higher-end Focal Stellia, the Stellia is a little bit more detailed. It's got a little bit more of a spacious presentation to it. It also hits really hard, but it's also a little bit more bass emphasized there in the upper bass. I mean, the Celestee is as well. This is sort of a interesting way that they're able to do this. And actually, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I prefer the Celestee's tuning over that of the Stellia. Now, I've been comparing this to the other Focal headphones, and there are a whole bunch of other headphones to compare this to. I'm just imagining other closed-back headphones under $1,000, but I keep in mind I haven't heard all the closed-back headphones under $1,000, right? So there's the new Aeon 2 Noir that's come out, and I think there's also the Aurorus Audio Australis that's worth checking out there for the closed-back. That I need to review those as well. So maybe we'll do another comparison with closed-backs under $1,000. I do also want to make a quick comparison here to the Sennheiser HD820, the closed-back, and of course it has a much better soundstage than what's going on with the Celestee. That's absolutely true. And it also has really good detail. I almost would give the detail edge to the HD820. But the reason I want to bring it up is that the HD820 does the 300 hertz dip to the extreme, right? So it has a massive bass bump at around 100 hertz and below, and then 300 hertz is just like gone. And the Celestee is a much more careful and restrained way of ensuring that the bass doesn't bleed into the mids. So while this does dip there at around 300 hertz, this is only like a dB and a half below where the Harman contour there is in the lower mids anyways. And I really am starting to think that this actually really does work for closed-back headphones. Not to the extreme of the Sennheiser HD820. You really do notice it on that one. But on the Celestee, I find that I really don't notice it that much, the lack of that sort of lower mid-range body. And I think that the benefits here far outweigh the consequences, or the detriments. You see some of these features show up in other ideas, other implementations, including you see it in the Harman target. You see that dip there. So there is something about that dip that is desirable. And I think the trick is that with closed-back headphones, it makes sense. With open-back headphones, maybe not so much. And there are going to be so many questions as to why, and that's something that I'm going to have to investigate in a future video. But for the moment, this is a much more tasteful and carefully executed way of ensuring that the bass doesn't bleed into the mids, at least compared to the Sennheiser HD820. So let me now give my conclusion here. Is the Focal Celestee worth it? Well, in my opinion, this is the headphone that I would buy if I were to spend, around $1,000 on a closed-back headphone, especially for the office, especially, if you're in an environment where there's stuff going on around you, or maybe you want to go to a coffee shop, maybe not right now because of the pandemic, but you get the idea. This is a very competitive closed-back headphone, and not just in terms of sound quality, but also in terms of efficiency, use case, and portability. And so this is an extremely easy headphone for me to recommend for anybody looking for this kind of thing. And while I can see somebody preferring a slightly different tuning for an open-back headphone, for a closed-back headphone, what they've done here, I think absolutely nails it. Anyways, that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.